Welcome everybody to diving into water parks, or if we misspell it properly, driving into water parks. Both of them are applicable. This is our monthly educational content brought to you by the Themed Entertainment Association Western Division. Today, I will be joined by three very capable speakers. We're going to do this a little bit differently than usual this time around. We're going to, instead of each person doing their own presentation, as all of us, including myself, have worked together on these type of projects, we're going to kind of do a little bit of a tag team and do a joint presentation. We're then going to open the floor for questions. During the course of the presentation itself, I would appreciate if anybody does have a question, go ahead and use the Q&A function. I've got that open, so I will be able to kind of collate all the questions, combine the duplicates, and make sure that everyone's questions get answered. If we do this right, we will answer all of your questions, and I don't have to answer any. So for the lazy moderator, that would be wonderful. A couple of quick housekeeping notes. We are recording, so everybody on here is being recorded right now. This will be posted on the TEA's YouTube channel shortly after we process the video. Please remain muted if you are not presenting, and also do not feel obligated to have your camera on because it won't be visible. In addition to that, our sole purpose for these sessions, all of our education sessions, is for the betterment of the community, to share information and knowledge. We are a product company and anything else agnostic. I'm going to introduce our speakers. I'm going to tell you for whom they work and what they do. That is for information purposes only. By no means is this construed as any type of advertisement for their services or their persons. That being stated, I think we've got all the tricky stuff behind us. Let's go ahead. My name is Andy Fastman. I am an architect. I will be moderating the panel today. With us, in no apparent order other than the way they appear on my screen, we have with us Kelsi Goss, who is the VP of Design at LifeFloor. LifeFloor is an aquatic safety surfaces company. Say that 5 times real quick. They provide slip-resistant and cushioned floors for these type of facilities. Then we've got Josh Martin, who's the president and creative director at Martin Aquatic. They are aquatic consultants. They provide design and engineering services. Lastly, we will have Onno, who is the president of water parks at WhiteWater. They provide design, engineering, and manufacturing. As some of you will have noticed, we originally were supposed to have Scott Loos of Wet and Wild Hawaii participating. Unfortunately, he has fallen ill. He did give us some notes to incorporate into the overall presentation in terms of his perspective as an operator. He's the CEO of that water park. So with his apologies, he will not be able to participate. However, I think we've got all of his best interests covered. Without further ado, take it away, team.
Thanks, Andy. Really excited to be here tonight, everybody. Proud representative of the Eastern Board who happened to get drafted over to the Western Board for this presentation. So Matthew Cross, thank you for showing up. But happy to be here. We're, as Andy said, myself, Kelsi, Onno, we work together a lot on a lot of projects. And so as we were putting this together, we felt it would just be better to have a little bit of a collaborative dialogue. So we will be jumping in and out and adding advice and hopefully not stepping on each other too much. We're going to try to walk you through the water park design process, some of the industry trends that you're seeing happen in water parks, and we'll each bring it from our own unique perspective as we work through. Many of you are probably very familiar with the themed index, and I'm sure you know there's a large section on water parks within that index. Water parks are a rapidly growing market. In fact, we went ahead and pulled, here's the data for the top 20 parks in the US. Most of the indexes kind of look at that top 20 or top 30 within the world. They give you a snapshot of, 12 million people went to a water park, but that's not really the picture of the market. In fact, in the US, there are about 1,500 different facilities that would classify themselves as a water park. And we'll talk through what that looks like coming up and what does it mean to classify as a water park. But for those of us here as part of the TEA, about 30% of those 1,500 actually view themselves as a themed water park. And so we've done the research here and we kind of pulled that. And so these are the most common themes that you find. So beach, nautical, tropical, Hawaiian, pirate is a very big popular one. Forest Treehouse, Western, primarily in the Western U.S., Safari, and then there is this other category where you've got, there is the DreamWorks Water Park in New Jersey, so you may have an IP integration that kind of doesn't fall within that line. We're seeing more and more of that happen. And so it's really interesting as a water park designer when we think about it. I get called all the time, and I know Onno can speak to this, of, well, what is a water park? And so here, 3 examples. We've got an outdoor water park with the tallest water slide in North America. We've got an indoor water park in an aluminum building in the middle image. And then we've got a resort amenity that's got a raft water slide and a lazy river. All 3 brands or all 3 facilities are going to market themselves as a water park. And so the term water park has become somewhat overused, but I think in a really positive way. It is really, a lot of people view it, and if you kind of look up and you talk to the World Water Park Association, who kind of tracks this, they basically say if you have one water slide, you might be a water park, and that's how they define it. And so when you think through all of that, when you're working with clients or you want to learn about, you kind of have to understand that maybe a municipality and they're going to build the new rec center, the new community center, and they're going to add a slide tower that maybe has 3 water slides. For them, that's a water park. And Kelsi, I'll kind of talk to you a bit about that. You guys do so much in the public sector model. I'm sure they all come to you. What do they call them when you guys are getting involved in projects?
Yeah, I think typically when there is a water slide present, that's most typically when it's a water park. We also deal a lot in the splash pad or spray park space, and that's, flat kind of wet playgrounds with spray features on them. And then, of course, there are pools. But yeah, I think most of these, once there's a water slide, they're calling themselves a water park.
And then Ono, obviously WhiteWater, more than water parks or water slides, as we kind of talk about it. You guys have really seen the growth of the water attractions industry. And so just kind of talk about maybe the evolution, as I think Kelsi did a great job of splash pads or spray parks, but what other things are you seeing added to the traditional water park?
For us, and although we do a lot of slides, for us, it's not always just a slide. A water park is even bigger than just slides. You can add a surf pool, a wave pool. You can add a flow ride or a standalone wave rider. There's all these different variations that you can add to a water park, or can have a standalone standalone water amenity that would be considered a water park. And that's why it's growing so fast, just because there's so many different variations, and we'll talk a lot about these different variations in the presentation. But there's just a whole range of variations that people can consider when they want to build a water park.
Yeah, exactly. And that leads us to, it's really all in the eye of the beholder. Who are you targeting? Are you creating a splash pad that, you want to be a magnet for little kids? Are you creating an obstacle course that for those that are young and young at heart want to run across as fast as they can? Are you doing a really immersive slide with lights and sounds? Or do you just want a river that you float around? And so when we think about this as a designer and a consultant, it's really about, and I think all of us, when we think about this, we are catering for guest experience. We are themed entertainment that happens to have water and bathing suits and showers and automated dryers around you. And so our big thing is, how do we think through what that guest experience looks like? And so we wanted to walk you through a bit of the development cycle of water parks and kind of answer some of those high level questions. And then, later on, look at how theming impacts with a lot of that.
So this is typically what the process would be like. Let's assume you've got a plot of land or just a humongous backyard. You would approach a aquatic designer and you would say, hey, I'm thinking of building a water park. And then you really start talking about what am I trying to do? So the project briefing is the crucial first step in trying to figure out, I've got this plot of land, I want to do something with it. With that, you really go into a design phase. And the design phase is a site assessment, you look at the park design, you look at the ride designs, and you come up with a storyline or a thematic overlay to make sure that you have a story to tell. And we'll talk a lot more about each detailed step in the slides to come to make sure you understand what are the different elements that come into play. Of course, once you've decided this is what we're going to be doing, you need to talk to manufacturers and sign a contract. You go into more detailed project planning phase where you really talk about what we want to open Memorial Day, whatever year. And with that, you're going into that detailed project planning phase. Engineering starts. That detailed engineering is often a very time-consuming phase just because there's a lot of variables that come into play, depending on location, depending on the type of land you have, all that comes into play. Then manufacturing, shipping, because often the location can be very remote and these water parks are being built everywhere. So the shipping elements and the logistics around getting the water park or getting the components for the water park where they need to be is often a complicated one. The install portion is really one of the last steps, also very elaborate because there's a lot, depending on what the scope is, there's a lot that comes into play. Then the testing and commissioning is the handover. That's where the manufacturer will train the customer, will show how the rides work, will kind of in the initial phase hold their hand and make sure that they understand how these rides are supposed to work and make sure that they're safe for regular use. And then there's the ongoing support and maintenance, making sure that these rides continue to work as they were designed to work. They are exposed to the elements. There's a lot of different variables that come into play when you're running these rides, whether it's water or whether it's just sun. They're all impacting the ride. And then the last step is often park optimization. How do you make sure that you run the park as efficiently as possible and you as the owner of the park can make the most possible money in a very safe way?
Yeah, I laughed there. For those of you who aren't in the water park space, everybody wants to open a Memorial Day. That is kind of the official start of water park season. So we had a client recently. We were trying to open for their project because it's more in a tropical location originally in December, and then it moved October, and the most recent call this week was Memorial Day next year, and we're like, we haven't even started manufacturing or designing. And so these are the questions we all laugh about. But no, I think it's a great overview of the process. As we kind of look at stage 2 of design, Onno, kind of talking through, what that's going to look like with the different types of projects.
Yeah, and it really starts with deciding what are we doing here. For a manufacturer or a designer, it's easiest if it's just a green field. You have again, I'll use a backyard, a big backyard. It's a flat piece of land, or it can be hilly, doesn't matter. But you have a plot of land where you want to build something, and that's the easiest situation you have. But of course, there's also a lot more complicated where you want to add to an existing park or refurbish an existing ride, and that comes often with a lot more complication. Just because if you do refurbishment, people want to maintain their tower as an example, and they want to maintain elements that they already have in the park, not reinvest into a complete new ride, but reuse some components of the existing ride. And that creates a lot of complexity because at the end, a water feature is the key element is you want to create a safe feature. You want to create a safe ride. And if you're reusing components of existing rides, you have to engineer around it. And that often creates a lot of complexity. Once you have decided, well, let's say you have a green field, you need to look at what are we actually trying to target? Who are we trying to target? Is it a kids area? Is it really a kids interactive area where you want to attract more kids, because that's an element you miss in your park, or you know that in the area you are in that there's not a lot of kids activities or kids attractions. You want to make a family ride, the middle box there, where it's really catered to the family experience, and make sure that people as a family can enjoy these rides together and look each other in the face when they're going down a slide like you see in front of you. The thrill rides, with, for example, the picture you see there, where the trapdoor lets you fall down into a slide, often very scary. You see online many YouTube videos where they're just focused on the face alone, and it's the scary part is what makes it so exciting. Then there's other options with interactors where, again, it's more family, but there's not slide specific, but it's more experience specific, or a surf experience where in an indoor park you want to add a surf element. It is one of those things where a surf machine can be open most of the day. You can actually create parties around it. You can invite companies to hire that surf element, and it's a revenue generator for indoor parks very often, because it can be separated out and still be a spectator sport where there's people around just watching the people on the surf machine. And last but not least, you can cater to the more boozy customers that want to have a bar in the pool, and it's more the high-end luxury feel that a water park can create. And it all depends on who are you trying to target, what are you trying to focus on, and who are you trying to get to your park.
And I think it's critical to remember that you're not designing a water park for you. You're designing it for a variety of people. Statistically, we know that only about 30 to 35% of anybody who goes to a water park is going to ride a drop slide where the floor falls out. People are claustrophobic, people are afraid, people don't like it. The people who do it love it. And so you're going to interview those people, and they're going to say, if you don't have that ride, you're not going to do that. Well, that same demographic kind of overlaps with the surf machine. And those people will surf and they will love it. But yet with the surf machine, you put a bar by it, you anchor your food and beverage. You've now created a spectator area. And so it's about thinking through those. We all know Andy would just want to be at the bar. We know that's his element of this slide right here. But that project in particular, the image 1 in the far left corner and image 6 in the far right corner are the same project. Those are both from a project called Serengeti Springs in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, that all three of us on the call were involved in. Really built around a really large kids play structure to cater to the young families, but they happen to have a pretty sizable college in the town. So the river with the swim up bar that they built was heated to extend their season so they can have, summer nights and tailgates and elements like that for college students. And so very strategically designed of who they were going after and looking at that demographic.
Yeah, and I think on our end, we are constantly seeing people trying to expand these amenities to accommodate all ages and abilities, and different play styles as well. So I love the image on the lower left there, the multi-generational play. I think that's another big component of this as well.
Absolutely.
So once you figured out which demographics are you focused on, you also need to figure out what experiences are you really trying to aim for. Again, similar questions. Do you want to create an immersive experience for kids on the left upper corner, where the slide is interactive, or it has a lot of fun elements integrated into the slide, or the middle one where if you go through the slides, you get a light effect that is unique to every ride, which makes it a completely different experience than the slide that has instead of rings, you can have arrows or something else in there to create, again, a different sensation in the ride. Then you've got on the upper right corner there, the interactives, where people squirt guns at each other, and there's game elements where you can score points, even if you want to make it elaborate, where people can play games on the play structure and make sure that there's interactivity between people on the structure, outside, around it, and again, you've got a lot of spectators. If you stand there as a family member and you see your kids run around and shooting at each other, it's fun to watch. Then there's a little splash pad for the smaller kids. Again, an experience where you see, if we have catered to the teens, but we're missing that small kid element, you want to make sure you add it, because these are things where you want to attract the whole family, and the teens are on their own slides, the smaller kids are on the splash pads. And these are all the things that you need to think about when you add to a park, when you build a greenfield park. All these elements come into play to figure out which experience is where. You've got blaster technology that is becoming more for, I'm sure that there's roller coaster fans out there that really want to see that roller coaster feel. But with water slides, you can do something similar, where with water slides, you can, with blaster technology, you can compete with each other, and you go uphill, downhill, and all these elements, all these sensations that you have with a roller coaster, you can do with a water slide as well. And last but not least, the middle one, where again you create a bit of thrill with a almost transparent water slide. As a spectator, as a guest, you can see the individual in the water slides. When you're in the slide, it feels that you're floating through the air. These are all elements that can add to the thrill, can add to your park, and can add to guests wanting to go there, just to make sure that they have all these different experiences and can enjoy these different experiences.
And I think going back to that kind of project brief early on that Onno talked about, we put together this with a lot of our clients of this range of experience and attractions, this excitement scale of what is your mix along this line. You don't want to be all, thrill on one side. You don't want to be all chill on the other. You want to have that mix where you've got the right idea. One thing I'll kind of highlight through this is, we've got both a lazy river and an action river. And a lot of you be like, well, isn't it just a river? And it's like, well, the experience is very different. Lazy is very much, I'm going to float. I'm going to probably have a drink in my hand. I'm going to go very slow through here. Where an action or a dynamic river, as we're now calling them, you've got a mix of wave generators, and maybe you've got a series of hills and thrills with the water hydraulic jumps. You're moving at a faster pace. It's kind of that action excitement for people who just don't want to be lounging in water, but maybe they don't want to be climbing up a slide tower. And so water parks are much more than slides and much more than play structures. And it's that mix of, vertical elements and flat water. And there's this kind of always balance of, do we have enough, we call it people eaters or flat water, that people can go do something? And do we have enough, hourly throughput entertainment units for slides for people to go down? And it's taking this chart and figuring out, everybody would love to have all of it. Don't get me wrong. You'd be like, oh, give me one of everything. But you have budgets and you have land space, and maybe you have a small backyard, not a big backyard. And you've got to work your way through what those elements look like. And so I think it's all about understanding that market and where you're at and what you're in.
And then the elements like that really finish it is the look and feel of your park. How are you differentiating? How do you want to make sure that you stand out, that you've got all the different imagery that works for your park? And the theming is a core element of a water park. Whether you want to do it with animal theme or whether with a different cultural theme, it is of key importance for the customers that are in the park and that feel that they're in a different world. And that thematic element or the storytelling that comes with a water park is becoming more and more important. You see that the bigger parks are really focusing on their storytelling and how you go through a park and what are the different experiences you have in the park. And that thematic element is where Kelsi also comes into play, where the flooring is now becoming part of the whole theme. And you'll see that later on in the slides, where if you create that whole immersive experience, it's becoming a whole new elements to your water park. So the other thing that comes into play is how do you want to differentiate as a entity? How do you want to present yourself to the outside world? For example, in Waterbomb Bali, they are key on being the most sustainable water park in the world, and that's been their thing for quite a while, and they've been very successful at it. They go to manufacturers and say, well, you need to save water. You need to make sure that that you reuse water, that the slides you use are recyclable, that the power usage is not what it used to be, that people are coming to the park because they want to be sustainable, and that's their biggest differentiator in their market, and it's becoming bigger. You see that in Europe, that sustainability is becoming more and more important as well, to make sure that customers feel that they are not polluting more than they already are at times. So making sure that there's this sustainable element. Then it's about what is the experience? How can you make sure that the water park is running 24/7, for example? Or 24/7 might be a bit of a stretch, but summer and winter, like the one in Showboat, where they have a retractable roof where they open up in summertime because it gets warm at their location, and they want to make sure that they cater to both summer and winter, and that their park is always accessible. Last but not least, it's about the new elements, making sure that you have, for example, the tallest slide tower or the first slide wheel, and that slide wheel has been something that has been new to the water park industry, where it's a mechanical ride that creates a whole new experience. But customers will want to differentiate with being the first one with a specific experience or with a specific ride, and that's going to be their item that they would market for their park.
Yeah, we're seeing more and more indoor water parks in climates you wouldn't expect. Texas, Florida, throughout the Southeast, Arizona. And part of that is, with being able to maybe attract and retain talent. When you're only open 4 months a year, it's really hard to build that staff up. So if you can look at the finances and keep that going, as part, it's just getting hotter in some areas of the country some time of the year. And so having the ability to have shade with that roof in a hot area is advantageous. There's a park in Grand Prairie, Texas called Epic Waters. They were one of the first indoor water parks in the Texas market, and they're busier in summer when people who can go to bigger outdoor water parks don't want to be in the sun, or they want a different experience. And so it's understanding part of that. How are you going to differentiate in potentially that crowded market? Onno, I'll kind of throw it here as the last slide here, kind of coming up about, what are these constraints?
Yeah, and the constraints are, and you alluded to it a little bit earlier as well, there's always constraints. You have a plot of land, there's always limitations with that plot of land, whether it's very hilly, how do you integrate the experience or the product with the piece of land that you have? For example, the pictures here on your left, where the hills are integrated with, or the rides are integrated with the hills, and making sure you've got this holistic feel to the water park. Or on the right hand side, where there's actually very little space. It's this particular one is in Macau, and they didn't have a lot of space for a water park, yet they wanted to have a water park, so they ended up building it on the roof of their casino. Just because they needed the experience, they wanted the experience, they didn't have the land, therefore they did it on the roof. These constraints are, from an engineering perspective, often very, very challenging, because it adds all kinds of uncertainty or things you need to take into account. But yet, at the end, what has been created is unique, and from a differentiation perspective, again, the customer can say, look at what we have, and come to our park to experience something that you can't experience anywhere else.
Yeah, absolutely. And for all the creatives on the call, I will make a appeal to you as a person who likes to be creative, but also runs an engineering firm. These are not spaghetti. They cannot just go wherever your pencil wants to take you. I will highlight all the structure that's on the image on the left, going through that mountain, going through down things. So many times we get brought into projects. Oh, it's just gonna fit here, and it's these are fiberglass pieces and molds that only have so many radiuses and turns, and we'll talk about code coming up. But just kind of mindful of that. That's the engineering side of my company that comes out, that would be remiss if I didn't say anything. So as we talk about that, we wanted to front load the part of it of just the overall orientation to some of the decisions that you're making. But really, before we ever draw a site plan, before we ever get into what that looks like, we're going to start doing market research. Our firm in particular, we have a sister brand called Ectovox that we use as our research arm. And with that group of people, we're constantly benchmarking above and beyond what's published. What are parks charging? What attractions do they have? What new attractions are coming out? Where are we seeing ticket prices go summer to summer? I'm sure a lot of you in the research side of the industry saw last year that water park prices, like theme park, went a little bit down as attendance was kind of down across the board. So it was, how do we get them in the gate and what other specials can we offer? So we're kind of tracking that because you really need to know, well, what can I afford and how many people are going to come here, or what can I charge? So that's going to start to dictate what you're going to put in your park. We also do benchmarking on the regional market. If I was going to build a water park in the Gatlinburg Pigeon Forge area, I'm going to want to look at what the other attractions are. Here you're seeing there's an array of zip lines and mountain coasters and a zip coaster. So if you're going to build a water park, like, well, we should have a zip line. Or are you going to be better or different or longer? What's your marketable claim? Because you're competing with a lot of other people that offer that probably in a better way than you could. And so we always like to look at the market and say, well, just because this guy has a wave pool or a flow rider or this type of ride doesn't mean you have to have. Where can you zig or where can you zag away from them so that you have those opportunities? All of that to say is, as innovative as we all like to be in the creative design and understanding, what can we bring to this market that's new, we are all limited and we all fall under the jurisdiction of a variety of codes. Onno and Kelsi are going to talk through the super fun world of codes coming up.
Codes, yeah. It's I think often a water slide designer looks with a little bit of envy to roller coaster companies where it's a controlled environment. You're braced in, you can't go anywhere. Yes, physics are a limitation, but we deal with the same physics. That is a controlled environment. In a water slide, people can go upside down. They can try to go down a slide on their head. It is a completely different different angle that you need to take with water slides. It's getting more and more controlled. I think ASTM is putting a lot of effort into to create these codes and making sure that people adhere to these codes. And internationally, you see that whether it's in Asia or China, CSCI, or in Europe, there's a lot of these countries are trying to make sure that the water parks are safe and there's regulations you need to adhere to. But with that, all these different countries coming up with all these different rules, again, as a water park designer, you run into all these limitations because different countries have different rules, different limitations, different requirements. And you see that although some of them are trying to adopt to international standards, it's still very, very complicated and still very different per country. That means, again, as a manufacturer or designer of water parks, you need to take that into consideration because each of these different standards or different rules will have different cost aspects, will have different things you need to do during install, during commissioning, and it becomes very, very complicated to manage all. And all these manufacturers, all the water park manufacturers are trying to push for standardization. It's slowly happening, but as you can see on this slide, we're nowhere near where we need to be just because it's different everywhere.
Yeah, we have, and we all probably work, like people on this call, with clients that are maybe based in one country or doing a project in a different country. And Kelsi and I do a lot of cruise line ship work together. And so now you've got a different set of standards to where, well, we're an American-based company, but maybe our ships are flagged out of this country, but then U.S. Public Health said, and so you're mixing all of these rules together. And even though you may be able to get away with something, and get away is the wrong word, maybe you be able to do something in one country, but they're holding you to a different standard because that's their company stance. That's all the stuff you have to factor in. One of the newest standards is NSF 50, Kelsi.
Yeah, so I'll talk on this one. This is a standard that was surprisingly not there just a little more than 5 years ago. And it's a surfacing standard for aquatic play areas. So anybody who's been to a playground recognizes that there's usually a squishy floor there, some sort of safety surfacing, and that's meant to protect the kids that are running around. It could potentially fall from equipment. But on splash pads, which are essentially wet playgrounds, there were no standards for surfacing, at least a little more than 5 years ago, which was crazy to us because you've got concrete with water on it and kids running around. What could go wrong? So essentially, NSF, which is an industry body that recommends best practices, came up with a standard that recommended products that are slip resistant and cushioned for these areas, trying to prevent some of those slip and fall injuries that were pretty prevalent with slick surfaces. At the same time, they also wanted to make sure that whatever safety surfacing was put down in these environments would also stand up to them. So some of those more porous products that you see on dry playgrounds don't really work well in these environments. They can harbor growth, and they can break down with UV and chemical, the combination of those in these spaces. So basically, this standard wanted to make sure that any surfacing product that went into aquatic play areas was durable for those environments and safe. So this was an exciting one for us to see. I think this is definitely an improvement. And beyond getting these areas to be a bit more safe, they've also encouraged the design aspect on the flooring level. So you're seeing a lot less gray concrete and a lot more colorful floors, which we'll definitely get into with the theming.
Absolutely. And I think it's a great knowledge that, you know, we are talking about recirculated, sustainable type systems, but we're adding chlorine and chemicals. We're adding, you know, acid to balance pH. We have requirements here. So the materials, so NSF regulates the type of filters and pumps and UV sanitizers and all these other items that are all meant for bather safety. And so when we talk about NSF and being standardized, it's making sure that all these products harmoniously work together and don't break down. Because if you use a flooring that, you know, starts to decay when you hit it with a bunch of chlorine, well, that's going to go clog your filter. Now we're going to have unsafe water for the bathers and the children. And so there's a whole product cycle there that as designers and engineers that you have to think about, because just because you want to do something doesn't mean it's going to be enduring or stand the test of time. So as we advance to design, you know, kind of bouncing in and out of this process. So we've looked at our market research. We've looked at the attraction makeup. We've kind of understood maybe what codes are going to apply to us. Well, now we get to a little bit of the fun stuff. Now we start to think about what are the designs? What are the elements I can do? This project in particular, we've not picked a ride or the shape of a river or what the elements are. We're just starting to look at relationships and bubble diagrams and capacity modeling. The capacity is going to ultimately lead us to what is our overall park capacity. And that's going to tell me how many entertainment units or ETUs, which I'm sure everybody's familiar with kind of on the call from the theme park side. But how are we going to get people through? Do we have enough attractions? Do we have too many attractions? Do we have enough flat water? Do we not have enough flat water? Do we have, in the water park space, an upcharge bougie area? Do we have an area for people to go rent their cabanas and be separated a little bit from people? These are all things that are asked for. So we start to think through what that can look like. From this point, once we kind of come up with the idea and we figure it out, we're going to ultimately move to a site plan. Very familiar. Here you're going to see that mix of the three worlds of us on the call coming together. We are all inside a lovely architecture building that's, you know, architects spend months on, Andy, and all that fun stuff. I joke. We're all in his space. So we've got water slides, we've got a play structure, we've got a surf machine, we've got a river, we've got our safety surfacing. This is coming to fruition of what this is a potential indoor water park could be. And so we're thinking through how all of that works. As you're going through the attraction selection, you're going to run into the dreaded word of VE, or value engineering. That's going to lead us to decisions like this. Great example of 2 slide towers. Each of them have a variety of water slides, both about 6 to 8 slides, both from our friends at WhiteWater and Onno, and working with his team of how do we find a slide that fits our budget, but also fits the age demographic. So slide tower A, 22 feet tall. So it's going to appeal to, we'll call it 10 and under. You're going to have some fun experience. It's a really good tower. It's compact. Slide Tower B, 40 feet tall, double the height. It's got some bigger rides, as you'll kind of see the one big flume here. It's kind of got this unique element. You've got racing slides, all of these elements, but there's a price difference. So there's a trade-off in this decision-making process. So our job as a design team is to work with the owner and the cost consultant and the operator and talk through, well, what's going to be the best for the project? What's going to work within our budget? But if we end up with Tower A, what are we sacrificing, or what age demographic are we missing? And do we have enough of those rides elsewhere in the project? Or if we go with Tower B, do we need to not maybe build as big of a slide tower or have as many body slides on another tower because we've kind of done this with Tower B? So it's this push and pull of looking at the design in this, yes, we want to cater, we want to hit these age demographics, and we want to have elements, but it's also about making sure that we think through, well, what's the trade-off without the rest of the project? So many of these projects, we are fighting for space. And so we're fighting, we're going to talk a lot about indoor water parks coming up and cruise ships, but we're fighting, Onno, you guys have been involved in, you said the other day in our prep call, the vertical water park. So as I switch over.
Yeah, and this is often, and on the previous slide, where the dream and reality often bite. The budgets are often the limitation. People have a dream of a very high tower, and then the reality turns out that, well, you need a lot of steel to build that high tower, and it becomes very costly. Sometimes budgets aren't really a limitation, and this was an example that was built in Qatar, and Qatar had the World Cup, the FIFA Soccer World Cup. I forgot, 6 years ago. They really wanted something big and iconic for their country, and make sure that they would catch the eye of the world. Unfortunately, COVID happened. The whole project got delayed. It wasn't open on time, just like many hotels that they were planning to build and stadiums they were planning to build. They were really unfortunate from a timing perspective. But this water park did open, and it's a massive water park. There's a land piece. They built this man-made island, and they wanted to have, again, a thematic element, a oil rig, and they wanted to have slides off an oil rig. On top was a big flame, or is a big flame, and they light it at times to again show that oil rig theme that they had in the whole water park. But this opened up a whole new market for us. The engineering was very complicated. The tower, the steel, you have to go up with 3 different elevators. You're standing in your bathing suit in an elevator. It's completely new. It's completely different from what everybody's used to, but it works. And the fact that land prices are getting high everywhere, doesn't matter where you go in the globe, it's becoming very expensive to get a big piece of land. With this, you need a way smaller piece of land. Yes, you spend more money on steel, but the vertical water park, the experience is the same. And it's a very consolidated water park, or theme park for that matter, where everything is off that one tower, and you can have 12 different slides in this particular case. And there's no other designs where there's more slides or higher towers. It opened up a market that wasn't there yet, because this vertical water park concept is especially interesting to dense areas where there's cities or different areas where there's not a lot of land available, yet they want to have, in this case, a water park. Let's go up instead of horizontal.
And so much of a water park, a water slide tower cost is that steel and that stair tower. And so we're seeing more and more clients try to optimize that investment and drive that price of, how many attractions can I get off this tower because I'm spending so much on the tower with the price. And, it's not something a lot of people think about, but if you are doing a ride like this, Onno mentioned it, they have elevators. There's very few water parks in the world, probably a handful, that have elevators to get people up their slide tower. But that's obviously a decision you had to make day one because that's going to be the central core of that tower. Another example is, working together. This is a project that all of us are involved in, from concept, indoor water park. We were able, this client had a vision also during COVID. But this was a brand new product. And so this was at the time called Aquaform, or it's still called Aquaforms, but Aquaforms, it was a brand new product. And we were, they had machined some of the parts that we were designing. And so Onno, is that part of the design? How, being a leading edge manufacturer, what's that kind of look like there?
And the complexity of building something like this and making sure that you do this in a phased way, because you can imagine the building needs to go up and phasing the steel going in and making sure you do it in a way that it doesn't interrupt the building itself. That was part of the challenge. And then there was this new product that we were designing, because it had to be an elevated structure where people could play underneath, but yet still get the full water park experience. That often puts a lot of challenges, because building a new product while building the building, while designing the feature, it bites. And the time constraints that come with it is often where it gets complicated. This particular element, in collaboration with everybody involved, worked out very, very well, just because the elements and the space was ideal for the structure that we at the end built. The coloring could be optimized, but still the experience, what is at the end key for any water park, is unique and works out well for the customer. Phasing it all and making sure you work with all these different parties and get everybody on the same page is where it gets challenging. And in this particular example, it worked out very well. Now, if we go to and Josh mentioned cruise ships as an example, where cruise ships are often even more complicated, because they've got, whether they build a new ship or whether they are refurbishing an existing ship, there's often very, very tight timelines, and there's a lot of trades on a cruise ship. So you're fighting for time, you're fighting for space, you're fighting for the crane. There's often 1 or 2 cranes that are available. Everything needs to be lifted to the top. That's where the collaboration, the collaborative effort is key, and it can make or break a project. And especially with these cruise projects, where they have, in a dry dock situation, they're very limited time, making sure you coordinate with all the parties, and you've got a design that works, and you have a lifting schedule or a schedule with all the parties that are involved on this particular cruise ship, and you live according to that schedule. You schedule in a way that everybody can win. That's where the challenges often lie.
Yeah, I could speak to that. Just on we're one of the last things that goes in on these ships. When you're a soft flooring, you don't exactly want heavy equipment going across your floor. You also don't want people welding on top of your floor. So our team sees this a lot of the time, and you've got to make sure you've got exactly the right parts and pieces there, and you've got a great team ready to go, because you get very small window, and if you miss it, well, the ship's sailing away. So.
To that point, and I've sent Kelsi these photos. I was on the inaugural sailing of that ship, Icon, which is in the upper right corner. And as we were doing tours of the ship the first day, they were still laying the life floor. All the boxes are out there. I'm taking photos and sending it to the team there, because it was an inaugural, and they were doing the baby area because there weren't going to be a lot of babies. So they had sequenced it out that way. Oh, sorry.
But the ship does sail, and that's often where
Does.
it gets challenging. You just need to continue to work and make sure you do it while the ship is on the water. What the cruise ship industry is also doing, and it's also fairly new, is they're buying all these private islands, and they're building a water park on the private islands. In this particular example, there's cruise ships coming in every day, and they charge, of course, extra for the water park amenities. But it's a private island. You're on a cruise ship with your kids, and the kids say, well, I want to go on this. And as a parent, you kind of say, well, you have to go along with it. Building a water park on a private island is, of course, also challenging, because there's no logistics that go to these islands. You have to rent barges. You have to do it all yourself. Often these private islands are sand and trees, so trying to build it all in the sand and trees, or just with only sand, it becomes complicated. But it has worked out well. What the challenging part of working in the Bahamas is that, of course, weather isn't always conducive. There is very strong hurricanes that go through these islands. Thus, building something that can resist that kind of weather, and deal with the elements that these islands see, is not always easy. But at the end, the engineering challenge that comes with it worked out well, and this is I think, an iconic park that all of us have worked on.
Absolutely. So we've talked a lot about these icons and these different challenges, but ultimately these are very complex engineering projects. The four of us, Andy as well, we're all working kind of on this project here. This is a water park expansion in the Wisconsin Dells, and here we have an open air there. It's a retractable roof aluminum building that we've kind of cut away for this view, but you get a sense of the HVAC systems. You start to see the back of house elements that are there. You see all the slides and attractions. We've got a bar and grill in this area. So there's just a lot going on in this 70-ish thousand square foot space. And everybody is fighting for that space. Selfishly, I'm going to show you the aquatic side, which is this. So just for me to support the water slides and the pool and the jacuzzis and the filtration, these are all the pumps and the pipes and the systems that we have. And so working with a really talented design team who knows how to challenge these projects together and centralize models. Water parks are a sequence of, well, what deep foundation is going to go in, because the building needs foundations, the slides need foundations. You see all the pipes that are down below all of those and how that interface overlaps, and look at the sequence of construction. This is sometimes the part that new developers or new people to water parks don't understand, is that when you put in a water coaster or a blaster slide, well, you have drains and additional pumps and you have different elements. So you're having to take water out and put water in. So it's not just a gravity slide, put water at the top, water comes out the bottom. So there's a lot of complexity midway throughout that we have to think about. This is all governed by code. We didn't talk about Department of Health or Department of Health standards, but it's all governed by that same element. So we're looking at ASTM, we're looking at NSF, we're looking at the local regulations, we're looking at occupancy calcs from architecture and from deck egress and restrooms. And that all has to come together in this chaotic marriage of an indoor water park where it is a very tight space that we're trying to fit as much in as humanly possible. And so that's a brief overview, maybe not so brief, of the design process. We did want to talk a bit about theming. Kelsi.
Yeah, so obviously there's a lot of design, engineering, thought, research, selection that goes into all of these things. But since we're all in themed entertainment, we also wanted to talk about some of the considerations we make on all of the surfaces and themed elements that we put into these spaces.
This is one project in Minneapolis working on called Mystery Cove. This is an early key art render that came out for the project. I wanted to show it. As you can see, we're taking advantage of slide tower we may have looked at earlier. We're taking advantage of safety surfacing. We're using that to start to tell our thematic story. But at this point in the project, we kind of didn't know what the whole Mystery Cove story was going to be and how we were maybe going to do neighborhoods and islands. And so our central island that is blue and green right now really transitioned in the theming and refinement to this concept called Peril Peak. And so it was a combination of Big Top Circus and volcano and types of elements. And we wanted to elicit that sense of peril out of that. And so we were able to work with both the slide vendor manufacturer, Life Floor, and we started taking that and we started morphing this element and these areas. And so you can see that all of a sudden the slides are now not resting on lovely blue and green, but they're resting on lava, and we're creating patterns and palettes that maybe become a play area. Kelsi, kind of talk through a little bit of that as we work together on this.
Yeah, so this is actually a dream come true for us because we've always wanted something where we could say the floor is lava, and we're finally getting that here. But I think something that's really exciting about flooring design is you can make it a feature in terms of having different ways that kids or guests, all guests, can really interact with it and play. So I love in this design, there's rocks where people can literally jump rock to rock across the lava, and that it's also really tying in well to the layout of the slide. So where the slide runouts are, you see the lava, you see it under the play structure. So this is a really fun project where you can really marry the two together. And I think that the surfacing design too is so visible. I think in your next rendering, it's even more clear. But it takes up such a huge visual portion of a water park. So I think the opportunity to add theming in this area is often overlooked. And I think in this case, it really brings the project to life, which is exciting for us.
And so for us, as we put together this kind of final key art render and some of the elements, it really was about, we knew we needed to have this flooring here for code and slip and fall. So let's take advantage of that and add it to the thematic element. So we're kind of doubling our dollars there and making that element work out. So we wanted to make that work for us to help tell that story, because the majority of people using this element are under 4 feet tall. They're not, these are, this one here in the bottom corner are for our smallest guest. And so this is going to be something that they're going to really experience and see.
Yeah, so we'll talk through a bit more on the theming and the flooring side, but often people come to us with a certain theme that they have in mind for what they want to represent on their surface. Like Josh mentioned early on, aquatic themes are the most prevalent in water parks, which is no surprise. So this one was more of an island with water and with some little sea creatures sprinkled throughout, which are hard to see from there. But it's always fun to come up with the concepts for these and then see them installed, looking almost exactly as they were designed. So, okay, you can go to the next one. Yeah, so there are different ways that people theme with their floors. I think the project that Josh was just showing was great because there was actually theming on the structure and the play elements. In many cases, we're retrofitting, and a lot of the spray features and things don't really have a theme. So it's fun when we can design a floor that creates a theme for that space and makes it more of an attraction. In this case, we designed these octopus tentacles and then had them weaving through and around spray features. And it really brought new life to this space and created some play opportunities with those paths and circles for hopping as well. So it's just one of the ways that people are using flooring to really engage their spaces.
We've started using flooring as a zone control, really kind of collaboratively working through. This is back to that Serengeti Springs project from earlier. We all love this project. As you can kind of see, we've got our kind of light blue that leads to all of our stairways. So intuitively, that's the color that gets you up onto the structure. Our yellow is actually our safest or our smallest participants, and then kind of our dark blue or light blue or medium blue to dark blue is where you have more of the spray elements and the dumping buckets and those elements. So we're intuitively, don't go into the deep water if you're a younger kid. There's something we're trying to do there, and we're looking at the child psychology and looking at what that means and how do they find a place that lets them be kids. Like, we want kids to be able to slip and fall. We want kids to be able to feel the desire to adventure off, but we're kind of giving them this boundary that they can see, but it's not this hard line. It's like, oh, you want to dip your toe a little bit in that deeper water, you can do that.
Yeah, I think something we talk about a lot in aquatic design is risky play. And risky play for a toddler who's just being introduced to water is very different than risky play for a teenager who wants to go down the biggest water slide that ever existed. So this zoning, we're seeing a lot of customers ask for it because they like to have those elements just for guests with different play preferences or different ages and abilities. It's a really good way to create those different play opportunities and diversify the experience. Another thing we're seeing that is a pretty big trend is actually turning the floor into pretty much the only feature. At this splash pad, there's a water slide coming down and running out, but otherwise there are just ground sprays coming up. And this customer wanted an IP-based design on their floor. And so we're seeing a greater request for this level of detail and branding specific to different properties.
Onno, we both worked on Morgan's Inspiration Island. Do you want to kind of talk through, designing the world's first ultra accessible water park, and then we'll hand it to Kelsi to talk about her involvement years after both of us.
Yeah, because Morgan's is an interesting park. It's a water park that's really catering to kids with special needs. Kids with special needs can go in for free, and it's really designed around to be inclusive for kids with cognitive or physical or sensory disabilities. And that, of course, is not really something you would think of with for a water park. It's often loud, it's water splashing everywhere, and that makes it not always conducive or welcoming to kids with special requirements. This water park was designed really to cater for them, and the water is warmer, is actually heated because there's kids that are really sensitive to cold water. The noises are dampened. The elements that kids can play with are at a lower level, just to make sure that kids in wheelchairs can access them. It was really something where we tried to figure out how can we make sure that this is an all-inclusive water park where everybody can come, and the vision of the owner of that water park, Gordon Hartman, was really saying this needs to be for everybody. It doesn't matter what your limitations are, you need to be able to play in this water park, and that's what you see. And that has evolved now. I think he's still changing things. And Kelsi, I think you're involved in with some of these changes that they're going through right now.
Yeah, so on the left is the original water park, or how it was just about a year ago. And they came to us asking for, they wanted to upgrade their surfacing. What's really cool is that the surfacing already had a really great design. So I like to see that level of theming that was already there. But they wanted to get more of that soft cushion floor. And so this was a project that we were able to help them refresh their splash pad and make it just a little more accessible for everybody. It's something that's core to our mission, just making sure that these spaces are catering to guests of all ages and abilities, and from very young to our senior guests and to people with all types of abilities. So this was a fun renovation for us. Again, we added a beach theme. They already had a surf theme there, but we were able to give it a little bit of a refresh, and it was really exciting for that property.
And so as we talk about renovation and theming, obviously, designing a water park, constructing a water park, theming a water park are all things that we think about, but really it comes down to, the type of materials you use and, understanding how do you maintain and keep that park operational for a long term. Oh no, I'll kind of throw it back to you.
Yeah, so we went through that whole cycle. We're now in that manufacturing cycle where making the parts, of course, needs to happen, and we're living in a world that is changing very fast. Shipping, as probably most of you have experienced, is not the easiest anymore. The costs are going up very fast. So making sure there's a date. We talked about Memorial Day at the beginning of this presentation. You need to hit that date. Making sure you've got a supply chain set up, an organization set up that can easily adapt to the changing world is crucial to make sure you deliver to what the customer needs. And that, from a manufacturing perspective, creates you need to be able to be flexible to changing requirements. And if the customer needs something specific or needs to pull in their date, you need to adapt. So the manufacturing, then you start doing the install, and the testing commissioning is really a key part of what needs to happen. Everything has been built. Typically we're on schedule, but then you need to make sure that the new operator is trained and they know how to operate these slides or the amenities that they have. And that is key to, I guess, any themed element or any entertainment element. You need to make sure that the customer understands what they're getting and they can operate it themselves. That commissioning comes with a lot of variables. The water flow is key to any water slide, making sure there's enough water, making sure there's not too much water, because if there's too much water, people break too quickly or they get into accidents. Making sure that is always constant is key to any water slide, and it varies per water slide. One particular water slide, even if you duplicate that water slide in a different region, the water quality can be different, and therefore the ride performance can be different. All these things come into play, and it always means you need to adapt to change to the local needs, because variables do matter. That handover is then often that happens in a couple of weeks, depending on the complexity of the park itself. And then last but not least, it's about the maintenance. And that maintenance piece is often or too often forgotten. Just like a car, fiberglass wears, depending on the conditions, depending on how much sunlight it gets, depending on the chlorine levels or the chemical components in the water, the performance will be impacted. Making sure that the customer understands that they need to maintain their rides, they need to come back to us on a regular level. If they resurface a slide, we need to recommission it, because the way the resurfacing has been done will impact, again, the experience or the slide itself, the performance of that slide. Last but not least, and you see that this is a bit of a changing market, a changing dynamic. The ride or the operator optimization is becoming a bigger component in our industry. Making sure that customers or the operator understands who's performing well. I've got, I don't know, 20 lifeguards. Some lifeguards are very good in loading individual into a tube, others aren't. Who needs extra training? Monitoring all these different things makes a park more efficient. If you can monitor how many people went to the bathroom and you see that, oh, there's been 50 people in the bathroom, you need to get somebody in to clean it. If you can monitor all these elements and optimize the operations of your park, it becomes a more pleasurable environment for your guests. And this is becoming a bigger and bigger element, because what you can add to it then is you can customize each experience. If you have people that are wearing a wristband, and Disney started this experience with their Magic Band, but you can change the colors of the slide because somebody says, well, I like a pink slide, and you can cater with lights or with other elements, you can cater to that need. You can have music in the slide where somebody says, I want to have a rock and roll in my slide. Somebody else wants to have I don't know, piano music. Again, all that can be catered, and you can create a personalized experience in a slide or in a ride, and that creates a new market that is becoming bigger and bigger in our segment.
Yeah, so also on the refurbishment side, I think we see a lot of parks where they've already got a great play structure, they've got water slides, and they're just looking to add a little something new to their space, but not get rid of what they already have. And in this case, this customer decided to add surfacing around their water park, and so that really brought it to life in terms of color, as well as they integrated some play elements to make the floor part of that feature. And yeah, they were able to create a whole new experience there that is now featured very prominently on their social media, just because of that visual impact and the play value that they have. And then finally, this is just one more element of play that we're seeing, is that the treasure hunts or different activities on the surface, but also the ability for all guests to experience these spaces a bit differently with that different type of floor. So we always love to see how we're expanding just the offerings and just the way that people are engaging with these spaces.
Absolutely. So hopefully everybody's gotten a pretty good overview of the design process, the planning process, what goes into water parks. We'd be happy to take some questions if there are any right now, and we will do our best to answer those.
All right, excellent. So we have a couple of good questions. I'm going to give a little bit of time for some more to come in and just ask some self-serving questions myself. So I know you guys mentioned code and standards on a couple of the slides early in the presentation. It's a two-part question. The first one is, as an architect, we wrestle and grapple with the code and what it does, to the project. The first question's easy. It's a straw poll. Is it a hurdle? Is it a challenge? Is it an opportunity? And then the second part of that question, I think, is the more in-depth request, which is, how are these codes enforced? How are they tested? How are these slides, deemed safe, and by whom before they go into service, or slides, elements, etc.?
I'll answer the first part from a aquatic engineer standpoint. Codes are challenges. because everybody has been to a resort in the Caribbean or Mexico or something, and they've done something that you probably can't do in your local jurisdiction. Designing a pool in Southern California is very different than designing it in Las Vegas, which is very different than designing it in Orlando, Florida. And so each state has local jurisdiction codes. The states that have the most aquatics, we'll call it the Sun Belt, they're going to have their own big codes. There is the Model Aquatic Health Code that is trying to become law of the land, but you have certain states that refuse to adopt it. So it is a challenge because you can do something in, for example, I can do something in New Jersey, which is the middle slide, that I can't do in Florida, which is the far right slide. So I think from an aquatic designer standpoint, codes are very challenging. I'll let Onno and Kelsi speak to the manufacturing operations side.
I could.
Yeah, go ahead, Kelsi.
Okay. I mean, in some ways for us, there are opportunities just on the safety side of things. We can provide a solution for that. But then, like Josh is saying, there are challenges state by state, especially when there are so many public health officials that are unfamiliar with a new safety surfacing product and question the integrity of it. Sometimes we have to apply for variances and basically convince public health officials that it's an okay product to have in these spaces. And we also see, at least within the US, for most pools, we have to use light colors on the pool bottoms just for drowning codes, versus internationally, we can have colorful pool bottoms. So that becomes a challenge for us when we want to get a bit more creative there. In the US, we typically can't. Oh no, I'll let you go.
Yeah, and I think you said most of it. I think in the US, there's indeed officials that sometimes very experienced officials, sometimes not so experienced officials, that you need to convince of you meeting code and making sure that they understand that safety is key, and making sure we adhere to the codes that are applicable. Internationally, it differs. I think if you look in China, there's a regulatory body, CSCI, that is very strict. You need to go through that whole process upfront. You do all kinds of risk assessments, and you go through weeks of reviews before you can actually build the park. There, it's a different control body. They have it. They're doing it upfront. Other regions are doing it afterwards. They're doing a check and making sure you adhere to their code. So it differs per region, but it is. To your first question, what is it? An opportunity? I would say all of the above, and it differs depending on the circumstances you're in.
Excellent. Okay, pulling from the Q&A, and I'm going to sort of combine a couple of them here. So typically a project would start with a story, but it seems, based on the slide that you guys showed early in the presentation here, that it is the last step in that flow chart you had. Is that common? And then the second half of that, is there a demand for more immersive cues instead of traditional stairs to the top? If so, what types of elements can entertain guests?
I would say our experience from a design standpoint is we have a loose story potentially at the front end. Whether we know if we're going to theme or we're not going to theme, but it is not the driving factor in the majority of water parks. You may have a North Star that you're guiding towards, but you have to take all these other things into consideration, because queue lines matter, and steel cost matters, and runouts and pumps and all of that. So story sometimes takes a bit of a back seat on a lot of projects. I think you're starting to see that change more and more. But I don't think there's any water park that I've been involved in that really looks at it and says, we're going to tell this, super immersive all-in story, and then we're going to weave water slides into it. Probably the closest one that's being built right now is Aqua Arabia in Saudi. They have integrated rock work to a level I didn't know rock work could be built, based on the photos we're seeing. But even then, I think you still have to find the right water attractions, because, as Onno said earlier, the physics and the elements that go with water rides, like, there's some things you just can't do.
Okay. From the chat, Michael Libby, because you don't listen. I jest. Excellent presentation. Question: what tools are you currently using to simulate water dynamics, flow, recirculation, etc., as part of your design process?
Yeah, it's a good question, and we've designed some proprietary software to be able to do that because it is the key element to any good functioning water slide, or when you start the design process, you want to make sure you understand what the water dynamics is going to be like. I mentioned earlier that the water quality is a key factor. The raft you're using, what kind of plastic is being used, all these are key elements. But what we do is we simulate with that proprietary software that we have, and we try to vet it on a regular basis. So we keep adapting. What we do is, as soon as we build a new ride, we get our drone, we hover it above it, and we try to make sure that whatever we simulated is in line with how different weight classes go through that slide. And these weight classes are key, because if you sit in a water ride or in a slide in a raft with 6 people or 4 people or 2 people, the vehicle will behave differently. And all that goes into our simulation, and all that is constantly being checked, constantly being validated to make sure that the next ride we come up with, that simulation software has improved, and making sure that we can better predict what is going to happen on these slides.
Excellent. Okay. For indoor water parks, are there any impacts on the design of building mechanical systems, HVAC, with the humidity, temperature ranges, and chemicals in the water systems? I will add to that question structural systems or any other materials.
Yes, absolutely. You are creating a corrosive environment of aerated chloramines, and that likes to eat away at everything. I mentioned them earlier a little bit. We have been working with a company called Open Air a lot lately. They make aluminum buildings, so they are much more enduring and much more resistant to these chemicals. We're also seeing brand new developers, people enter the space, they are much smarter than maybe they once were, as far as understanding that HVAC conditions and that YMCA syndrome of that smelliness chloramine factor they don't want in their park. As you see in the middle image on the screen, the roof is open. We are venting fresh air in and out. So it is a key part of the design. You do get to design a more efficient and in that turn more a cheaper HVAC system when you are able to get fresh air turnovers through a system like that. But there's a constant study being done on what can we put in the gutters or the edges of pools to pull more chloramines out. What type of paint are we putting on our hop-dip galvanized steel structure to protect it longer? What are we doing on our stair treads? We have a lot of projects that we're no longer doing maybe fiberglass stair treads. We're actually wrapping them in life floor because they hold up better with some of that water elements.
Okay, so following on that, do you vary the materials or composition of slides and flooring based on the environmental conditions, site specific, for instance, saltwater adjacent, seasonal locations with colder climates, etc.? Or are the materials in the elements themselves one size fits all?
I can answer the slide portion. Kelsi I'm sure can talk about the flooring. So typically we try to avoid it, just because it creates, every time we have a chemist on staff and we tweak when there's really a need for it. You see that certain colors, again, just like cars, are withstanding the elements better than other colors. And sometimes we do a little bit extra with certain colors that are very, very sensitive. But again, back to code, some of the indoor parks need a specific code. And you see that in some areas, they require fire retardancy of the slides. And although you would think they're water slides, there's lots of water around these things, the code still will determine in certain areas, like for example, Singapore, that you need to meet a certain code requirements. And with that, you need to change the composition of that material to make sure that it's more fire retardant. So in short, we try to avoid it for slides, but at times we are forced to by the elements or by code. Kelsi?
Yeah, for us, our tiles are installed in locations close to the equator, Dubai, Australia, as well as in very cold environments. Like the freeze-thaw cycle of Minneapolis is something that we see quite a bit. And they withstand both types of environments, I think, because they expand and contract with the heat. I would say that the one thing that we're more aware of in the hotter climates is trying to push people towards lighter colored floors. We wouldn't recommend a black or navy blue floor in those spaces just because they'll get very hot. But otherwise, our product has been one size fits all.
Excellent. Okay, combining a couple of them together here, but ultimately, what is the proportion of your structures or slides that are designed from the ground up, as one-offs versus off the shelf versus tweaking something off the shelf to be, more purpose-built?
Um, Off the shelf doesn't really exist, other than the slides are coming out of molds. A mold, we try to avoid building too many molds, but in reality, we have a lot of molds. I think it's always a unique configuration. And with that, you can argue, well, it's a little bit off the shelf, but the configuration always new, and there's always new molds that need to be built to make sure you can finish the slide all the way to the bottom. So what proportion is greenfield? Again, it varies per year. What you see is that when China was still very active, there was a lot of greenfield. I would argue that half of what we did was greenfield. China after COVID is less active in water parks. So with that, I think it changed a bit. So it varies per year. So I can't really give you a one size fits all answer.
No, I think that's good though. That gets to it. Okay, here's another one. What are some key metrics when assessing the age demographics for different types of aquatic attractions?
I think that for us, it's looking at how you break out your ETUs or entertainment units based on what your market research might have told you. So if you're doing if you're working in a market like Orlando that has a lot of young families, that's what you're going to do. You need to make sure that you're catering to that. All the feasibility reports we get will tell us that, oh, well, we think, 60% of your guests are a family of 3.5 people. Figure out the half. But you're that and what that looks like. And so for us, we're trying to balance. It's that mix on that scale we showed up early on in the presentation. We know through industry trends and going to these parks that only that 35% are going to do the scariest rides. So you don't want to make 60% of your rides that type of ride. So it's mixing all of that out. The most popular ride right now are family raft rides. The communal experience, as you see, both these slides kind of have a big wall slide, and these two images on the left and right, and that is a ride that you experience with another person, or multiple people. And so we're designing parks where we're trying to have 60+% of our attractions be multiple people experiences. A mat racer is that you can race against somebody, so that classifies it as that. We're moving away from single ride body slides. We don't see that being the demand that it used to be.
Excellent. Okay, looks like time for one more question, and I kind of love this one. It's a perfect one to go out on. What is one small detail in any park or attraction that you've worked on that most guests would never notice, but as the practitioner here, that it makes the experience better?
Good
Oh, come
question.
on, this should be the fun one.
That's a good question.
I really thought they were going to ask like what still annoys you because it wasn't put in correctly, and I was ready to like jump to
No.
that slide. There's a lot of we're working on a project right now that we have equated the stairs to a variety of different trips around certain places. And so if you ride all of the slides in a certain order that's been predetermined that we know about, you will end up traversing and kind of winning this award. You only will know it if you've gone on the app that they have and figured out this challenge. So we're seeing invention with people in trying to pre-plan their elements. That is a really important detail to me with storytelling of I'm trying to get people to want to come back. And so we're trying to Easter egg in a lot of stuff like that from a design standpoint. I will use the image on the screen that nobody knows. You guys are all going to figure out on this call. The cladding that's on the icon tower at Perfect Day was a very late addition. Quite frankly, it was pretty far in the process, and we're like talking about hurricane category 5 winds, and we're talking about how windy this tower is going to be, and all of a sudden everybody realized I'm going to be 135 feet in the air with nothing around me. And so it became a feature, but it was not part of the original design because we all kind of didn't think through the safety aspect. But rather than just putting up a wall or a barricade, it became the icon of the tower. I mean, that was WhiteWater re-engineering the tower way late in the process to have the cladding work.
Kelsi, Onno?
Yeah, this one's hard for me. I'm trying to think through all of the different projects I've worked on. I think one thing that some people might not see behind the scenes is sometimes I consult with my kids on the designs of these floors. So some of the inspiration does come from them. They are the representative of a lot of the end users. So there are some design elements that get built in that nobody would realize was inspired by my kids. And then I think on the custom imagery, I don't think a lot of people realize just how intricate the production of that is on our side. Nothing's painted, it's all factory cut. And so there are a lot of tiny little pieces that have to get puzzled together to create that. And I thankfully don't have to do much of that work anymore, but I have on some of these projects. And I think just having the map of all those little pieces and knowing what went into that and getting to see the guests experience it, that's always rewarding for me.
Yeah, the first thing that came to mind for me was more on the safety side, and my kids hate me for it. I've got 2 teenage daughters, and I'm already an embarrassment, so this makes it even worse. But every time I check the water levels, there's a sticker at a run-out lane, and that's where you can see whether the operator has enough water in the slide or not. And I will always go back to whomever is running the slide to tell them, well, hey, you don't have enough water in this slide. And they hate me for it because it has happened in numerous occasions. I even go to the maintenance manager to tell him, guys, this is not right. And then we have to leave because I'm embarrassing.
That is part of being a parent. All right, that takes us, we only ran over by 2 minutes. Thank you all so much for bearing with us late in the evening and listening. Panelists, thank you so much. That was, even I learned something, which is kind of great. And I think, as Darren mentioned in the comments, this is one of the most informative sessions, if not the most, that we've had since I've been affiliated with this. So thank you all so much. And we will see everybody at our mixers, at Inspire, and at all of the rest of our events this year.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Have a good night.